to Getting Grounded, the open and honest conversation about the transition of parenthood and everything that comes along with it. The joy, the chaos, the fulfillment, the challenge, the identity shifts, the relationship changes. Let's talk about it all. Dana is a speech language pathologist, which was invaluable to me as a brand new mom. And we're going to talk about all of those skills and the things that she sees and does and how it helped and didn't help her as a parent.
As you were saying, I have been a speech therapist for about 10 years, which is crazy. And for a long, long time was working at an outpatient pediatric rehabilitation center. Really working with like birth to teenage years. And I did that for, like 8 years. And I recently switched into an elementary school, mostly because of, being a mom and having to make that work for my family. So, I'm sure more to come to chat about all that and all the kind of changes and sacrifices you have to make as a parent. But so I've been there as a mom, really.
As
I
a
know,
mom,
no offense to
specifically.
job's exactly the same, but here I am with the, but so I've been there. I started there in September.
You have so much knowledge about children's development and both being like where they should be developmentally and how to nurture those skills, and then also when they're not there. And so sometimes that can be helpful as a parent, cause more anxiety, all the things. And you were beyond being my friend that was pregnant 5 months before me, or sorry, had a child 5 months before me, that also just is a wealth of knowledge in some of these things and were like so helpful for so many of the things. And then of course we had the experience where you actually fed my children and changed my experience in them, which was again invaluable. I'm just grateful you exist. But let's talk about all those things. Let's talk about the having your skill set and things you put into practice, what some things that made it easier, some things that are a challenge, and what can be helpful for people.
Yes. So, I mean, on the surface, like, sure, it made it a little bit easier to know, like, very detailed, like, specific milestones for speech and language, for feeding, what's normal, what's not normal, how to facilitate some of those skills. So in those ways, like, yeah, of course, that was like, I felt like, oh, cool, this is going to be easy that I have this. But on the other side, like, like I was saying, like nothing really prepares you for the constantness of it, and like just the total shift in your life of becoming a mother or a parent. And even in my area of expertise, like I was humbled very quickly because I wanted to breastfeed. That was like, my plan. And, I'm not like a CLC. I don't have like my certification in lactation, but I had, taken some courses like professionally, not just like the breastfeeding classes for parents, which I had also taken. But I was like, yeah, I have like, no, there's an IBCLC at my work and I've taken courses related to feeding. Like that's going to be no problem. I know exactly. Not worried about it. Well, no, it's so hard. And then like, Sydney was having trouble gaining weight and her latch was bad. I had to use a nipple shield, which I was like, and then in some ways I'm spiraling like, oh no, not the nipple shield. Like that can help, that can reduce some milk production. Like then sometimes I know too much where someone else like, okay, I need to use this to help me out a little bit. Sure. But I'm going like all the way down this path of like all these things that it could do negatively. They're like, oh, I think she has a posterior tongue tie. I'm like, I don't, the research doesn't really support posterior tongue tie. Like, oh, are you just one of those, then I start, so it's like so quickly, I'm like, okay, knowing knowledge and then being a mother are separate. They're two different things, and it's not like going to be a cakewalk just because I know when kids say their first words, you know what I mean? So I think that in some ways was good for me to be humbled that quickly early on. Like, all right, this is not like, nothing actually. So here you go. Kind of getting thrown into the fire there. But, yeah, I think so. I think if there's anything comforting, like, I feel like sometimes people think like, well, I don't really know kids and like, I don't work with kids and like, thinking it's going to be this horrible thing. It's hard for everybody, no matter what, no matter whether you're a pediatrician, me have all this experience with kids, like you're going to get to a point of parenthood that is not your expertise, and you have to just, try your best.
Yeah, I think also like my husband's a pediatric dentist, and I remember the stories he would have before we had kids and then now the stories after and the ways that he can relate to
Mhm.
parents and the advice he would give before versus after, which is the same thing we're talking about with friends too. But I think like now as a parent, as a I would want a provider that's a parent because they just understand. So it's so different. They
Mhm.
can give people can give all the tips about the day to day that I should have with my kids and like, oh, just do this. Unless you're a mom or a dad who has experienced
Feel
the
like
struggle of doing just do this,
I
it's
need to
very, very
need to go through like the medical record and call up some people and be like, I am so sorry I suggested X, Y, and Z. I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, I don't even know why you kept seeing me after that. Like, no, yeah, I think if anything, it's made me a better therapist, like the other way. Like, it's having kids has made me a better therapist than
yeah.
being a therapist making me a better parent. Because now, like,
Mm.
right, like I get it. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, like that's not possible. You know what I mean?
Right.
More realistic expectations, and just I mean, I always feel like I had empathy, but even more empathy, like, sometimes you go through a medical road, like, "Okay, born at 26 weeks. Oh, yeah, I see they had the CPAP and this," and now I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, that must have been really hard for," you know what I mean? Like, kinda taking
Yeah.
the time to be like, "Wow, could I imagine if that was the experience I went through," right? Um,
Right.
so I do think that if anything, it's made me better at my job than my job making me better parent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I do love that sound because there's so many things that you helped me with, and to that point, like me, you are probably spiraling in an anxious way with your kid, but then with to be able to give me the tips, like it
Mhm.
was like with straws or with certain development, or just there's so many tips that you gave me, and we'll talk about the feeding experience itself. But I wonder if, like, I luckily didn't have to track a lot of the milestones, and my kids were initially they took a little longer to speak, and then all of a sudden we're like off with the races and like giving soliloquies all of a sudden. I was like, what the fuck, like you and you were I we were maybe going to get you checked, and now here we are, like you
Yep.
guys know more words than the average adult, but which is again a lucky experience. But I feel
Mhm.
like I didn't a lot of my friends here knew the milestones and would, like, say certain things, and I'd be like, "Oh," like, I intentionally didn't track them
Mhm.
because I didn't want to be overly anxious, so there's it's 2 sides, right? Like, you need to know them. You are way, like, overly familiar with intricate details, and, like, is there a happy medium? Do you think people? Because we wanna talk about a little bit of, like, parents' intuitions versus
Mhm.
provider tips, but where do you sit there? What's the
Yeah,
best case
it's
scenario?
hard. I think it kinda depends on, like, your personality. Like, if you think that that is gonna make you more anxious, then, like, yeah, maybe I would say kind of avoid it. Versus, if you can kind of, like, know that information and stay calm with it and it's gonna kinda help you, then go for it. Um, I do think your pediatrician is always a good resource, but I will say that sometimes I feel like they maybe have like a more of a wait and see approach longer than I would like.
Mm,
Because my experience when I was working in outpatient is that, like, I had plenty of times that I would eval a kid and be like, "Oh no, they're doing great. Like, you're fine. Keep practicing these things. Maybe we'll schedule a check-in in 6 months, see how they're doing." And you know, it's kind of one of those things that, well, now the professional in that area has given the okay, like that everything's fine. I'd rather that than be like, why didn't you come in 6 months ago, type of thing.
mm.
So I think you can kind of use your pediatrician, like, if they are concerned, uh then that's valid, right? Like they're I'm trying to think about, like, there's kind of like sensitivity screen, right? Like, so if
Yeah.
they have concerns, then that's valid. But if you have concerns and they're kind of being like, "Oh, that's okay. Like, let's check back, if they're not doing it in 6 more months, then we'll refer." But you still don't feel like that's the best approach, I would kind of push on them that. And that would be the time when you'd say like, "Okay, well, I'm still concerned. Is this um like substantiated? Like, let me look at the milestones and then kind of make a decision like, you know what, no, I really do want them to be looked at. There also the other issue is that like everywhere has a wait list. So it's like if by the ever you get that time of like, yeah, you know what, we really are worried, you might still not get in for the appointment soon enough. For me, that would make me really anxious that like my doctor is worried, I'm worried. Now I still can't get seen for 3 more months, right?
Mm,
Is kind of the inverse of that. Um,
yeah.
so I think if you can kind of, manage your own, like I think it's helpful to know, have a rough estimate of like knowing the milestones and trying to kind of manage yourself about like like not worrying too much about it. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So I also, especially about the like when to refer and when is a good time and what's normal and what's not in terms of the milestones, because the milestones are I think that's why I often dismiss them because they're kind of crazy. Like some of them have the widest ranges and some
Mhm.
of them are like miss the mark a little bit that like you're like, oh, at 1 year, they should be saying this many words. And like my kids weren't, but then a couple months later, they were doubling that, so
Mhm.
sometimes it's child specific, which
Yes.
also is easy for me to say because I have this unique experience of seeing two kids at the exact same time and the vast differences between them. And this can be good for some people and not good for some people. Like I have a very good group of friends here. We all have kids that were born within the same few week gap of one another. And so we would be sharing so much with each other. And
Mhm.
some kids were super ahead in certain areas and some were behind in others. And sometimes that's helpful for people, sometimes it's not. For me, one of my friend's kids, he walked at 9 months, but like walking. And that's insane, right?
Mhm.
But like, which sucked for her. Like, I'd be like, my God, like this kid is so unstable and could just be like off to the races because he can walk and that
Yes.
where, there's like he's such a physical kid even now. But it didn't worry me because my kids did walk at a year. If they
Mhm.
hadn't, and I had maybe that example of like, well, he's been walking forever. I don't know. It can be helpful or harmful. For me, it was helpful because I had two. So seeing all the differences among all of our kids was like easier to level set. Like, well, development is per child, but sometimes not, right? Sometimes they actually do have. So, like, how do you know? How do you
Yeah.
determine that?
So some of the milestones are like ranges, right? So a lot of like the physical ones are ranges. So and like that's a perfect example. Like walking, I think the range is like, well, usually it's like 11 months to 15 months.
Yeah, he was out
Yeah.
range.
And and it is hard, like the CDC a couple years back like revamped the milestones but didn't use the input from like like PTs, OTs and speech pathologists.
Oh,
Like,
really?
yeah, people were very upset like with how they took crawling out, which like PTs and OTs were both really like, at least the ones I was working with were like, that's crazy. Like, yes, some kids skip crawling, but we don't ever recommend, like, if we can avoid them skipping crawling, we do because it helps with balance. It helps with like developing the fine motor muscles of their hands. Like, there's so many benefits to crawling that we would never want to skip it. Or you could be, now I'm talking about an area that's not even my expertise, or you could skip crawling because you have some kind of, uh motor challenge that's now missed, right? Until they get
Mm.
older. So anyway, I digress. But
Well, even that specific child I'm talking about, like, I remember she was a little concerned because he wasn't crawling.
Mhm,
He wanted to skip straight to walking, and
mhm.
our kids were crawling. He crawled for 1 day, and then he walked. So,
Yeah.
like, he didn't skip it, which is
Right,
great, but, like,
yeah.
it was like, "Oh, he's not crawling, he's just pulling himself up all the time." It's like, well, now he's just walking,
Now he's
so
walking, yeah. So,
and he's fine, luckily, like,
yeah.
totally fine?
And I think it's the hard thing too is that like you stress so much about it in the baby years, and then it's like, okay, when these kids are 5, no one's going like, I could tell that kid started walking at 11 months. This one was 15. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's like it
right.
seems so important at the time, and then later it's like it all kind of evens out. I will say that the ranges ones, like I like Zoe is like this. Sydney did everything early. She crawled at 6 months. She walked at 11 months, like walking well. And Zoe is on the second end of the back end of the range. Like crawling is like 6 to 9 months. Zoe was like 9.5 months. Whereas just before I can be like, all right, I guess maybe I should make a PT appointment. And then she starts crawling. So now I'm like, she's not walking. She's probably going to start walking at 15 months. She'll
Mm.
be just on that later end of the spectrum. So I think with the spectrum ones, like just everything is fine if once you get to that end part of the range and it's not happening, that's where I would say like, okay, that's maybe worth pursuing. That's maybe worth looking into. And then
Okay.
some of the speech milestones, it is important to know milestones aren't when kids do it on the average. It's like when like you should expect like, 90% of kids do this by this age. So it already does kind of factor in that most kids will do it by this time. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So that's
Yeah.
how it's kind of like, okay, that's where we can say, because if they make it just like this is when the average kid does it, there's so much variation there, then it's kind of more meaningless, right?
Okay.
It's
Right. But it is most of,
it's
okay.
when most kids do whatever it is that the milestone is measuring.
Okay.
So if you want, I could kind of very briefly talk on the speech ones, if that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, speech is interesting. And because speech and feeding, I think are feeding specifically, I feel like because it's stressful with breastfeeding and it's stressful
Mhm.
with the type of eater. And like, so it starts out stressful and then you get to food and that's stressful for totally different reasons. I feel like meals are a source of stress for so
Mhm.
long,
Mhm.
even now, where
Yes.
like it's not really all that stressful, but they think it's funny to like throw like they know not to throw anymore. And now sometimes they'll like, oh, but we're giving it to Winston. I'm like, but I told you not to.
Right.
And then you're like, well, Maddox as a whole all his digestive stuff, so it's totally different,
The
stressful for
feeding
that
is
reason.
always
It's never not. Even now, like they eat really well, but then they like sometimes don't want things, and you're like, well, do
Mhm.
they need to be? I feel like meals will be stressful forever. Maybe
Yeah.
like is that
I
something
do
that
feel
ever
like when I
isn't?
was working in outpatient, when I had a patient come in that was like delayed in language versus a patient that came in that was having feeding challenges, the stress in the room for the feeding challenges was always exponentially higher. That's where I'm gonna have
Mhm.
a parent crying. That's where I'm gonna have, like the
Mm.
anxious mom, like like you know what I mean? Because there's just something so innate about like instinctual about like I need to feed my child, like my child needs to be
Yeah.
fed, they need to be there's nothing more stressful than that not going well because it feels more like connected to your parenting, your motherhood, like your nurturing aspect than like a delay
Mm.
in physical skill or language skill. um I don't know, I think it just feels like you're more exterior, like, oh, okay, well, I don't have that much influence over this. And a lot of times they don't
Interesting.
have a lot of influence over the feeding part either, right?
Right.
In some cases, but it just feels more like you need to eat to be alive, and it
Mm.
just makes it stressful. So
Yeah, and then the choking aspect, and there's just, like,
mhm,
so many. But the speech one too, it's so interesting because, as I said, my kids were a little like, a couple months delayed, maybe. I at this point, I don't remember, and I feel like that's the part that's
right,
hard
that's
is because a lot of parents, like one of my best friends, again, that best friend term, one of my best friends has a daughter who's much, much older, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, she was like that, and then at 18 months, it just exploded." 'Cause that's what people say,
mhm,
but in the period that you're in during it, you're like, "Okay, but is this normal?" Like, that feels so different than now being on the other side because, like I said, like, my kids, their speech is unbelievable and has been since the day they then like they started speaking and then it went wild. That's probably not everyone's experience. So now I don't worry about it. But early on they were delayed. Like that's a fact. With milestones, they were delayed. So let's talk about speech a little bit. Is that the norm that like it's just behind and then it excels or no
yeah,
or
it can be, and that's why it's important to then like be referred, have the professional look at you because like when I see a kid come in and they're just like have a little language delay, like, oh, it's so easy. I'm not worried because I know,
Mm,
okay, I can just try to work on some of these things. Maybe they will hit that like 18 months does feel like a very critical time. Like sometimes you have that language explosion, we even call it. Um, or, I see a kid and I'm like, I'm having some concerns for their receptive language too. They're not responding to their name. They're not following directions. Could there be something larger going on here, right? And so it's like,
right.
as a
Which
parent,
is why the
you
referral is
like as a
important.
parent, you might not know that, right? But
Mm,
if you came to the expert, then they can kind of help guide, like, hey, I think they actually should go for a neuropsych evaluation, or okay, there's some other things going on here versus just
mm,
okay, yeah, let me give you some. tips for helping to facilitate like a language rich environment, right? Those are like two totally different cases. Like one that's very easy for me, one that's I'm a little more concerned about.
I should also be clear that despite saying all these things that I didn't track the milestones, so I made sure I wasn't anxious, all of that is true. And we did have them evaluated.
Yeah.
Like my pediatrician was like, maybe, I don't know. Like she's like, it doesn't hurt. And I was like, cool. I
Yeah.
agreed. Like if they're not meeting it, you're telling me it doesn't hurt. I'm obviously a little concerned, like they're not meeting this thing that people are talking about. So we had them evaluated and they and had the people even still keep coming, even though, because to your point, it takes time. And in the window, we looked for it. And then from when they were evaluated in that window, they started speaking. So by the time they came, it was like, well, now I'm not worried, but should I still be? So they came to make sure it stayed on track. And at that point, I literally just had a person come to my house to shoot the shit with me because there was no more concern. But
we probably were like, "Ooh, this is a nice one to have on the caseload. Super easy. If these kids are look like a rock star, I do one thing and they copy it.
But yeah. But it was also helpful to your point too of I was speaking to them like an adult would speak to another human being because I hadn't had a baby at that age before and things. So that she gave me some things to say that at this point, I, again, don't even remember because now I still speak to them like they're adults.
Yeah.
But I explain a lot to them and maybe that is what changed. I explain everything. I explain everything we're doing. I answer their questions fully. If there's something I don't want them to do, I tell them why. And I think maybe that originated then because it was well, giving them more information, more to work with, is sort of when there were things that she said and did that I found helpful. So I'm always glad that I
think
had.
that's why I do tend towards if you are concerned, within reason, right? No one should be getting an evaluation because their 9-month-old isn't talking or something, right? Within reason, it's just helpful to have that expert say, yes, everything's okay, or no, I'm a little concerned. And even when it's the yes, everything's okay, it's like, oh yeah, and here's a couple things you could keep trying, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's always helpful to just have that kind of that guidance. I mean, I would say my biggest tips is this is one of those things that it came very naturally to me, but I know from talking to other people, it doesn't always. You just need to just be narrating everything you're doing at all times. So, the way they learn is by imitating and getting that exposure. So it's just I always joke that I'm going to be in the nursing home with dementia being put in, take out, ready. Oh, uh-oh, it fell. And they're going to be what is this 86-year-old person talking about now? Just put in, take out. What are you talking about? But just kind of narrating every single part of the play and emphasizing what we call these core words that you use. So core words are when you look at what we talk about, our vocabulary, they make up 80% of what we talk about. And then fringe words are those 20%. So fringe, and this is a common thing parents do, fringe is naming all the animals, cow, pig. But those words are only important when you're playing with the farm. In, out, go, stop, put, come, take. You're going to use that the whole day. So when you're trying to think okay, this toddler is delayed in language. If I could help them to learn 10 words, what would be the 10 most important words? Things that they can use throughout their day, not 10 animals. Because now you use on to playing with cars, you can't say anything now. So it's kind of trying to focus on those high frequency words, narrating, which you use all the time. So if you're just talking every day, oh, I'm pouring your milk, it's going in. Basically, Miss Rachel is the best and the worst because I feel if a parent ever watched Miss Rachel and they came to my session, they'd be like, so you're just doing what Miss Rachel does.
Is that your job? You watch her and you imitate it?
And then I also, when I first watched her, I was like, why did I not think of doing this? But
because you're not a musical theater major who can write all your own songs.
I'm not married to Mr. Aaron who produces music or whatever. Yeah.
Unfortunately, not married to Mr. Aaron.
Or fortunately, sorry, Mr. Yeah. So, I mean, she is, I know some people think she's annoying, but that is a good example of how she kind of slows down and she really emphasizes her words and she is constantly narrating what she's doing. those are all really good strategies for helping to build those foundations for language. And repetition. So like when
Mm.
you're doing play, you try to like ready, set, and you leave that last word off for them to try to vocally fill in. I'm sure this is some of the stuff that was happening with the EI therapist that was coming, like trying to
I I I don't really remember, which is funny because I don't remember her. There's 2 things from it that I do remember. But, one being in the evaluation, my kids were, like, so far ahead in certain motor things, gross
Mhm.
motor, I guess, but fine motor, the test is specifically picking up a crayon and drawing with it, and I hadn't exposed them to that, so they, like, failed that because they
Mhm.
were like, "What is this? Do I eat it? Like, I don't know." And
Mhm.
I was like, "I have twins, I don't know, I never showed them a crayon, like,
I
this
know,
is
and
me,"
then
you know?
also the part that I hate so much is like the guilt then, right? You're like, it's my fault. They don't know how to use like the amount of times that I would be in an eval like I was in an eval one time and this mom's like, oh, like my father passed away when he was like 6 months old and I feel like I got depressed and then I wasn't talking a lot to him.
Oh
So like I
god.
feel like he has a delay because of that. And I'm just like, okay, this is one of those times where I was like, this is good that I'm a parent. So
Yeah,
we're just gonna pause right there. Like
this is not
he's
your
not
fault.
first of all, the kid did have he was autistic. So it was like kind of one of those things too. It's like you couldn't have
Really not your
you
fault.
literally
Yeah.
could not have done anything about this. But the fact that you're coming here and that's like the first thing you're saying to me is just like, oh, it hurts my heart that you are
Yeah, you're
internalizing
carrying.
this guilt. And so I'm like, okay, you had no influence. Like, I'm sorry that happened to you. And then you had no influence on what's going on right now. And like, now we can do the evaluation, right? So it's
Yeah.
hard too that like the connection we make between like our kid having a delay or having a challenge and then how that's caused by our parenting and like most of the time it's not like you're
Right.
like your kids were more advanced motor wise and you had the evaluation there for language. Well, that's not surprising to me because like one skill excels while another skill is
Right.
brain is like going through these bursts, and so it's like you'll have this burst in motor skill, and language kind of takes a back seat, or vice versa. You
Mm.
have a burst in language, and motor takes a back seat. It's like that's why there's ranges, right? That's why
I
it's kind of like has their own path, their own.
Well, also on the narration component, which is funny, I don't know if, this might be I don't know, even now still, like, hearing that feels ridiculous,
Mhm.
and I don't know, did you read Bringing Up Bebe?
I did. I didn't like it.
Some people love it, some people don't. There are things about it that I loved. I've heard
'Cause
so many people are like,
she
"I
was
loved
like very
it."
anti that. 'Cause she was like, "Oh, in France they don't do that."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is what I think
And
about now because I
and
think
making
about
fun she was like, when she was being like, "Oh, an American parent on the playground," be like, "Ooh, wee," and I was like,
exactly.
"Shut your mouth, because that's me," you know?
That's
But
all I'm thinking about right now as you're
mhm,
saying that. It's like this
mhm,
stereotypical annoying American that
mhm,
we overdo everything and we like talk to these kids like they're whatever. And so that I guess I internalized because even now I'm thinking like
mhm.
that feels like
Well,
this stereotypical annoying thing, but it's healthy to do,
yes. I
it's like
think
this
that
weird.
I'm glad this is a good point that you brought up. I think that or well, I know this, that even most kids will develop language despite having like a super language rich environment or not, right? Because like the usually the typical development, that's why it's called typical, because typically what happens is you develop language. Whether you have an SLP mom going like, "Oh, honey, you want more, more," oh, or somebody who's not doing that, right? The chances that the kid will develop language and talk and have mastery of language is probable. It's more like if your child is delayed, then those other factors are important of narrating, using
Mm,
those to like close-ended ready set. Because now we've already said, okay, for some reason they're having struggles, they're not picking up on it. And so, how can we like focus in on intervention? I mean, that's even why actually Miss Rachel exists, is her son was language delayed
yeah.
and so I think that's actually a good point that like, you know, you you probably will, even if you don't do any of the things I just said, like your kid will probably learn to talk and be just fine. It's more like
Mm.
if you are feeling like, oh, we're approaching those milestone times and then I'm not hearing that, it's not happening, that can be helpful. So I think that's where it's like in her book, she's kind of being like, oh, that's and it's like, yeah, because probably the default, so the most often the language will come regardless of kind of what input you're putting in. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
pieces of like neglect or no, deprivation, but
Sure,
that's
different.
not what we're talking about. So yeah,
Right.
I do remember her saying that and me being like, "Ugh." I didn't like the book for other reasons. I did love it for the feeding parts, talking about
Yeah.
like
The schedule, like in the how they're not hungry at meals and that's why they're terrible at restaurants. That one stuck with me.
and how like
See that?
and I was like, oh my god, I wish our daycares were making them like carrot puree and whatnot, and like the
Oh yeah, oh my god, the meals at the
yeah
free daycare.
yeah
Let's not
free
even.
daycare. How like Americans we always like run around with kids with our snacks, and I'm like, so it's funny because then I'm like in that part I'm like, yeah, I don't bring snacks to the playground. It's like you're hungry, okay,
Right.
come on, let's have lunch.
I know, I don't either. It's like meals. And sometimes I'll have what I'll call it snack lunch because we're out, but like it's
Yes.
lunch. They just happen to be eating snacks for
Yeah.
lunch.
Actually is our lunch because the lunch is our
Yeah.
first meal, so that it's just a little smorgasbord of snacks. But
Yeah, it depends on the day, the location, the
Mhm.
whatever. But I
Mhm.
do so let's segue into that, which is perfect. I want to talk about two things. Feeding things that will I mean, it's as we said, it's so stressful, so I don't know, like, we'll try to highlight certain things and you helping me with that. And then also picky eating, because I know there's certain things that maybe you think or could have influenced that with your kids, which I have interesting takes on because I have, again, 2 kids that were raised in the exact same environment. I mean, granted, he has some sensitivities, which I think influenced it a lot, but I don't know. I have one kid that will look at what I'm eating and go, can I have some of that? And the other kid that's like, I'm all set.
Mhm.
And she'll like eat my bowl of quinoa. And I'm like, this isn't even good. Why are you eating it? It's made with like, there's some tomatoes on it. And she's like, oh, yeah, I want
Yeah.
that. So there's two parts. So let's start with first the feeding itself and how scary that can be and helps
Mhm.
tips there because you literally thank God we went on that trip at the time that we did because I was super intimidated. I had started with baby led weaning. One of my kids gagged so hard they threw up everything in their bottle. And my
Mhm.
mom was there, who's 1,000 times more anxious than I am. And she's like,
Yeah.
you need to not do this. And
Yeah.
you need to do purees like I did. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. Yes, I do. And then luckily it did like
Boomer
a little bit of a mix.
hates baby led weaning. Sure, they cannot. My mom was so funny during that time. She'd be like, "No, no, no." I'm like, "Mom, I literally do this for work." Like,
Yeah, right, like, I am a very skilled in this arena, but
it's
then I
okay.
was afraid to give them, like, anything, and you,
Yes.
like, smushed some berries and handed it to them, and they were covered in berries and having the time of their lives, and I'm like, "Okay, alright, this is safe, I can do this."
So I will say, I feel like baby led weaning. But that is what I did with my kids, and I feel like it's very popular right now. But I think that that's kind of tough because I feel like now parents feel like that's what they should do. That's what they have to
Mm,
do. And it's not. Like the research is showing that whether you choose baby led weaning or whether you choose like the traditional approach of starting with purees, both can be equally as effective in gaining skill for feeding and for, pickiness, right? So I feel like people think like, oh, baby
right.
led weaning is what you need to do to not have a picky eater. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily true. So the traditional approach would be starting with purees and then like a couple months later introducing finger foods, and then as they get older then they can just eat normal foods that are modified slightly like
Yeah.
adults. Whereas baby led weaning is starting with real foods. You can incorporate purees, but it's like the child is like leading that by like you hand them the spoon that has the purees loaded and they
Mm.
feed it to themselves.
Which I did do that.
But yeah, it's mostly like, okay, you're gonna give
Thanks to you, though, you, like, sent me specific spoons and things to
yeah.
use, and that's what I did, yeah.
So I think it creates a lot of anxiety that people think they have to do baby led weaning. And what the research really shows is that the most important thing is to have responsive feeding. Have caregivers use a responsive feeding approach. So that looks like reading the cues from your child. Is your child like if you start with purees, that's totally fine. But what we shouldn't be doing is trying to kind of sneak a bite in, or they're turning their head away and you're still coming at them with the spoon. So those are all examples of not being responsive. Your child is trying to tell you that they don't want to eat and you're trying to kind of force it. And those are the things that can later create picky eating. Baby led weaning by nature doesn't already have that because the whole point is you put the food down and the kid picks it up. But you can do purees that same way by just reading the child's cues. So, you have your puree, you have your spoon. You want to be looking for what we call like a positive tilt. So if the child's leaning towards you, they're opening their mouth. I mean, they're telling you, I want that bite. So whether you're giving it to them or you're loading the spoon and handing it to them, if they're bringing their mouth open and leaning towards you, you they are showing interest and you are responding by giving it to them. And when they show cues that they don't want it by turning away or pushing it away and you stop, you're being responsive. That's that's what you have to do. That's how you help them to become someone who feels like, okay, eating is fun, I'm enjoying this, and creating a positive association. So I think it's like it's become this thing because you are not the only like friend that has been like, oh my God, I'm trying to do this baby led weaning and like I'm just so terrified that to be doing it and be so anxious and be scared, and the kids can pick up on that. So if that's
Mhm.
your experience, it's supposed to be fun. If that's your experience with it, don't do it. Do period.
Yeah.
And then when they turn 8, 9 months, okay, now you can start offering some finger foods.
Yeah.
It'd be worse to do baby led weaning with your heart not in it, freaking out. They gag and you're because then they're learning, "Oh my god, oh, that was scary, that's dangerous, I
Right.
shouldn't be doing that," right? So it's like if it's not for you, pivot and do purees, and I think, like, people need to know that the research on either approach is consistent as long as you're being responsive. That makes sense.
Mm. Yes, it does. And I remember being like, then when I decided, okay, I'm going to start with purees and I'll do a mix and I'll do different things. I think I ended up doing a mix also because my pediatrician or people were like, well, you do one ingredient at a time. And like right now, unless I mean, if I didn't have twins because I'm so crunchy out there, weirdo, and I had less on my plate, I probably would have made everything if I'm being
Mhm.
honest with myself.
You
But
have
the
great
world
organic options now that I mean, like
well, there are great organic options, sort of, and I think this is why the universe humbled me by giving me twins because I couldn't do all those things, which is probably a good thing for me. But it was tricky to find single
oh,
ingredients. Like there's
single,
like
yes.
a few classic single ingredients, but then
Mhm.
everything is mixed because you're in like step two. So it was like a little tricky in that I wanted to make sure I was exposing them to things and like, for allergy-wise, which you don't even necessarily think of, or sensitivities, and granted, none of that even mattered because I still have a son with sensitivities, so I just like, I think that's why I ended up with the mixed approach, but it was helpful, and it was the right thing for me, right? Like,
Right.
I'm glad that and a lot of people ended up telling me that same thing. They were like, "Well, then we went to purees," and now to your point, there are so many purees out there that, like I remember giving them salmon puree, which I was like,
Oh,
"Ew," but
thank
they loved it, and I was like, "Great, full of omegas, it's organic, they love it,"
yep.
and they even still eat salmon a lot now.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about the picky eating part too,
Yes.
because I'm curious, you don't have picky eaters, and like I said, I have one I wouldn't even call him a picky eater, but because of his stomach stuff, whatever, but he's pickier and it's not
Mhm.
as easy to feed him. But even still, like, you have a kid that's very similar age to mine. Even though she's not picky, does she still have, like, toddler preferences where she's like, "I want quesadilla," and you're
Yes.
like, "Okay,
Yeah.
here's quesadilla."
This is one area where I feel like parents do have more influence than they realize. I think sometimes people just say like, "Oh, you're so lucky, your kid's not picky," or like, "Oh, they're just so picky. There's nothing I can do about that." I do think that there is some influence we have here, but it is important to know that every single child when they get to toddlerhood will exhibit some they will not be eating oh, 12 months they are eating everything. There isn't a food they won't eat now. Oh my gosh, they're refusing that. That is 100% going to happen. So like let's set the stage for realistic expectations. It's for several reasons. One, it's cognitive development. Like when you're 12 months, you don't even know that there's other options. So you're just like
Right.
presented to you. When you're 2.5, 3, you are aware that there's another food that could be in the fridge that you want to have, or that like I ate something yesterday that I really liked and I want that right now. So
Mm,
one, there's just the awareness of other things. And two, um, in the same reasons that we're seeing it show up in other areas of like temper tantrums, like they're experimenting with protesting, refusals, pushing boundaries.
mm,
What will happen if I say no? And they even have kind of shown that like there's from an evolutionary standpoint, like this concept of like neophobia, like toddlers go through this period of being afraid of new things as a way to protect themselves. Cause like way back, hunter gatherer days, like a baby is always with mom. So mom's always seeing what baby's eating. And now 2, 3, they're kind of toddling off. They're exploring. They're not always like hovered around by an adult. So dangerous to pick that berry and eat it. Could be poisonous, could die. So kind of this is like almost like an evolutionary trait of them to be like, I don't recognize that. That's new. I'm going to be cautious. I'm not going to eat it because
I wish that would fucking apply to running in the street.
yes, why? Why poisonous berries are not as an impact in today's life as like, yeah, like let me just, Sydney the other day was like, there was a cat in the street and there was, and sprinted into the street and I was like, fabulous.
Right.
So all that to say is that we should expect there to be some level of pickiness. Now, this is where parents can kind of like tip that over into becoming extremely picky or just kind of smooth sailing through this normal pickiness phase and getting through to it on the other side. So I think if I were to make one most important tip, there's several tips, but the most important one is uh, I love this approach. It's by Ellen Satter. I think she's a nutritionist, and she causes this concept called division of responsibility. So the parents decide when and what is being served for food, and the child decides if they'll eat it and how much. So I genuinely never say like you need to take a bite of that or try this and then you can get whatever. Like I don't use any of that. I even try to like explain it to her in terms I think she'll understand like this is what's on the menu tonight. This is what's being served. You don't have to eat it. But this is what we're all having. We all have the same meal. And
Wow.
it takes some pre-planning. Like if it's something that I think is like, oh, this is a little weird, maybe she's not gonna want this. The menu will include blueberries because I know she's gonna eat blueberries. So we're eating let's say salmon and asparagus and blueberries. Like that would never be a meal I would make for me and my husband, but like I'm going to put a food on there and say this is where the pre-planning kind of comes in and with the mental load and that can be tough. But I sort of pre-think like, okay, what's one thing I know she'll definitely eat? I'll include that into the meal. And then that's it. That's what we're having. And if she refuses to eat the rest of the stuff, I let that be how it is. I do not say if she says, oh, well, I want to have, you know, toast or something. I don't bring that out because what you then teach is that no matter what's being served, I can always get what I want. I can always get something different. So I don't have to eat this because no matter what I do, how much I dig in, something else will show up. So it's like to preemptively add something I know she'll like and then say nothing else is coming. This is it. I'd say probably at least 7, 8 out of 10 times the rest of the food gets eaten. Not without crying first, a protest, yelling. And I say, no, you don't have to eat it. I might, do a little play things. I might ignore, but I just kind of, I think sticking firm to that boundary of like, nothing else is coming. So you decide if you want to eat all of the things on this plate. If you just want to eat the blueberries, that's up to you. And I try to hold firm to that. And then, next thing you know, oh, look at that. The other things, now you're eating the other things. You started with the blueberries, you ate all of them, and then you slowly started to eat the other things because you know what? You are hungry and eating feels good and nothing else is coming. So yeah, you know what? This isn't so bad.
This is fascinating because 90% of me agrees with it, like in concept and in theory. And that 10% of me who's not doing any of this
Mhm.
is like, what? Because as a parent, you then have to accept like the fear that you put in yourself of like, but I needed them to eat, like we were talking about before,
Yeah.
and the nourishment that needs to get in there. And like, I know that toddlers sometimes will eat air and sometimes will eat a whole casserole, but
Mhm.
like, it varies in wherever they are, but it's still like a harder pill to swallow.
Yeah, this is where like when I would say this to a kid that I was working with, like, and they're like they're like underweight, like the parent would be like have a heart attack, like, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, because that is so much more stress. So baby steps too. Like she's already not picky, so I can do this because I know that she will. Like this happens not that often in our household. But if you're already if so like what do I do? Like, oh my kid's already picky. Like what do I do for that? So you make their meal that that they love these 3 things. So it has that. And then put a little bit of a non-preferred or a new food on the side that's just part of the meal today. You don't have to eat it.
Yeah.
You don't have to touch it. It's just there, and kind of
Yeah.
work your way like the opposite way. Like, here's their safe foods, but I'm always going to be adding. So in the example I gave with my family, like 1 safe food, 3 other foods that I'm not sure what she'll do with it. You would just flip that, like
Yeah.
3 safe foods, 1 new food, and you just
Yeah.
and don't get me wrong, like there's times where she'll be like, I don't want that, and she like flips out like we've never done this concept before, and I just say like, okay, you don't have to. It will be on your plate, or it will be on your plate. So you
Mm,
don't have to touch it. You don't have to eat it, and like, and it's fine too because it's like sometimes I'm like. I do this for work, and then my mom will be over. She's like, "You're pushing her too much. Like it's too much," and I'll start to like kind of have doubt in myself. But then, sure enough, 30 minutes later, I elbow her. Hey, look, and she's eating the food that we just had a 15-minute meltdown over, wanting to throw
mm,
off the table, right?
yeah.
So
It is interesting because I do have like, without knowing this intuitively, I always have a safe food, but in my head, I would call it like a starter food because
mhm,
even when they were little, it's like the thing they like,
start
you
with
put there, and then it gets them to start eating, and then they eat the whole
That's like
plate.
eating begets eating. It's like they start eating their
Right.
favorite. And people might know this too from like just like into like as an adult too, like intuitive eating and food has no morality and some of those kinds of things. Like, go
Mm,
ahead and put the dessert right on the plate with the dinner plate. And instead of like making that level of like this food's better. So, right?
right,
It's like
right,
the message you are sending if you're like, eat all your broccoli so you can have that cookie, you're just saying to them, like, yeah, broccoli sucks and cookies aren't
right.
good for me.
Right,
It's like, I'm going,
right.
here's your dinner. You have 1 cookie, you have 3 pieces of broccoli, and you have a piece of
Mhm.
meat. Yeah, maybe they'll start with the cookie first. But if and then again, we were talking about with the from bringing up baby, if you're not having them graze all day, you're having that nice like meal
Right.
time with space in between, like they are going to be hungry and they're going to start with their favorite and then kind of go like, oh, that's feeling good. Eating's feeling good. And they keep going.
Right.
You'll notice.
Yeah, generally, my kid, I'll put the thing that they like, and then yes, it sort of follows the what you're saying. But most of the time, I'm feeding them things that I know they will eat, and I'll put something new, knowing that my daughter might used to definitely try it. Now it's hit or miss, but my son will not. But before he would like throw it off his plate,
Mhm.
and he still will be like, I don't want that. And now I just say, okay, eat around it, and he'll leave it there, which is a huge
Like
like that's
that
you
is
know
that is huge step. Huge step.
yeah, so that's good. But then so I'm like, I'm naturally doing the things you're saying, and also not because even my daughter who's not picky at all will eat things and then go, I want something else. And I'm like, okay, what do you want? And she tells me and it's made for her. I gotta go make it. Okay. Like that is a
Mhm.
and most of my friends don't do this, but we are like short order cooks in our house. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you want? Okay, I'll go make
Yeah.
that thing.
It's usually I would
Whatever.
use the same phrase and I'd say, "You're not a short order cook." Like, that's what
Yeah.
it was, that's what it is. And I will say I do recommend, like, okay, well, especially, like, you do that, they are okay with the idea of, like, okay, those other foods are there, and there's some, like, discretion that has to be used. Like, let's say they eat all the blueberries and they're really not going for the other things, like, "I wanna have more blueberries." That I'm more okay with than, like, adding something else that was never on the meal in
Right.
the first place. Does that
And
makes
you know why I know this definitely works? And maybe I don't know if this could go both ways, but I send things to school that I know at home they'd be like, I'm not going to eat this. And
Mhm.
I know they clear their plate at school. Like my kids eat salmon a lot. And it's always because I sent it to school. If I whipped out salmon at home, they'd be like, I don't want this right now because I know there's 100 other things in the
Yes. I
fridge.
mean, that happens for me as an adult. I pack a salad for lunch, and by
Mm,
the time I get to lunch, I'm absolutely starving, and it is the most
mhm.
appetizing thing. I'm like, "Oh my god, I need to eat." Like, but if I'm at home and I've been grazing all day, like let's say it's like a holiday meal, you got like crackers and cheese, and you're grazing on stuff. Like, I'm not gonna go like, "Oh, look at that delicious salad." You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like the
Right.
the setup beforehand of like, this is the only food I have. I brought this from home. I have 30 minutes to eat lunch. It's the only food I have, and I'm starving. That the way you eat that food is such a different experience than if you're like not that hungry and
Yeah.
I can eat that, but like what else is here? Like this other food that's like more, appetizing. And that goes
Yeah,
in
like the cookie.
Yeah, like eating because you're hungry or eating because you're bored kind of thing. Like the same things apply to our toddlers. And so
Yeah.
that's a perfect example. Like it got sent to school. They probably don't even put up a fight because they know like, well, there's not what's in the lunchbox is all I'm gonna have. So either eat
Right.
it or don't eat it. There's no other
Right.
choice, you know?
Yeah, and you have the ability to enforce that across the board.
Mhm.
Oh, man. Nope, my kids are like, "Mom, I want this," and I'm like, "Okay," but sometimes we don't have it, and I'm like, "We don't have that," and then they go, "Can you buy that for me?" And I'm like, "Yes, but right now it
Mhm.
doesn't exist,
Yeah.
so have what you're gonna have," and
I
yeah.
mean, you know, Zoe is only 12 months. So I am, I do know these things work as far like these are recommendations I would give to a parent if they came into a session. And then I apply them at home and I'm like, ooh, they're working. Amazing. Look at this. Work and home are about measuring up. And then maybe I'll be doing all the right things and and then I'll be like, well, we'll have to do a new episode. And I'll be like, well, I was
Yes,
what?
yes. A year from now, we will check in
Where
and
you're like
see if it
humbled
humbled you.
again, but no, generally those are my recommendations of like try not to have grazing so that you're building that appetite hunger fullness cycle so they come to a meal. You're going to try something new if you're starving. You might try something new if you're starving. You're not if you're full. You're just going to eat your
Mm.
favorites. So like that is one. Try your best to be like this is what's being served like and plan ahead like at least one or two things that they'll eat but don't give into that like getting something else out. um
No, those are perfect, and
yeah.
I feel like because you are my best friend, I could sit here and talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but I'm not going to make you do that. So I was gonna ask for like a main tip in closing or a biggest takeaway, but I feel like food wise, you just said that. So is there anything else that we can should close on, or anything else that we didn't cover?
I think basically just kind of trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, if you feel like something's off, like my philosophy is like why not have it looked at by the person that's their expertise. So,
Yeah.
you have concerns about motor, ask for that PT eval. If you have concerns about language, ask for the speech eval. And you could talk to your pediatrician about it, but you know, you know, like try to find that intuition that I feel like is hard for us to have because there's, social media, there's all these experts in there. But, if you're worried about it, just get that reassurance from someone that is in that field, you know?
Well, I love you. You're the best. I'm so grateful that you exist for so many reasons. So I will link everything about you
Okay.
below. And yeah, go back to your babies. Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening, for joining today. I'm so happy to have you. If you liked this episode or any of the episodes before, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast or sending the episode to a friend who it might help. For important takeaways that you don't want to forget, I write a little recap on Substack along with other articles about motherhood, marriage, spirituality, everything that falls in between. So you can head there to Soul Love with Sam, same as my Instagram, and subscribe. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.